Good evening and welcome to part 2 of the gateway to that good gut feeling. I'm so happy that you have taken the time to be proactive with your health and be here tonight to listen to me elaborate on all things gut health. So I would love to know, with this being part 2, did you get to watch part 1 or have you just come across the part 2 registration during your scrolling? I'd love to know for a couple of reasons. One, just to see whether or not there's certain things that I would need to elaborate on further on throughout the presentation, and also just to get a good idea on whether or not I need to reintroduce myself. So if you wouldn't mind just popping in the comments for me whether yes or no you've seen part 1, that would be brilliant. And now I'll jump on to the next slide while I'm waiting for people to get those comments in. So just a quick disclaimer here that the information contained within this presentation is for educational purposes only, okay? So it's not intended to treat, diagnose, cure, prevent, or mitigate any kind of condition. And it's always advisable to check with a medical professional if you are struggling with some kind of issue, medical concern. All right, so I'll just check these comments. Just bear with me 1 second. All right, okay, so it looks like some of you have seen part 1 and some have not. So for those of you that don't know who I am, my name is Tony Dingle. I'm a health coach and I specialize in gut health. And the reason for that is because I believe that when we are looking at the gut, and hopefully you can understand why I feel this way by the end of this presentation, when you take into consideration what's going on in the gut, that it's our first line of defense from the environmental factors that can harm us, then you can understand that the wearing down of that system is going to cause health concerns. And Hippocrates, over 2,000 years ago, for those of you who don't know who Hippocrates is, he is the father of all medicine. He stated that all disease begins in the gut. And I could not agree more. So I believe that that is the foundation of health. I believe if we address that first, then everything else will follow. And the way that I got into gut health was because my son developed eczema. Now, I did go and see the doctor and we got prescribed the steroid cream, and I put the steroid cream on and he had a reaction to the steroid cream. And the doctor's fix for that was to put a different type of steroid cream on. So for obvious reasons, I decided to think outside the box and look at alternative ways that I could help my son. And I started reading about gut health and I developed a massive passion for it. And I started implementing the things that I was reading into our own life. And pretty soon my son's eczema cleared up. Now, along the road, as I was learning about gut health, I started to learn how it was linked to all different kinds of things like behavior in children, in adults, anxiety, depression. When it comes to autism, a lot of autism children on the spectrum have a lot of digestive issues. And so it wasn't until I was having a conversation with my girlfriend whose son had just been diagnosed, and I mentioned this to her, and her response to me was that, yes, I have heard that, but there's so much information online. I don't know where to start with it all. I don't know what to believe, and there's no support for people like me out in the bush. So we live remotely. And so that was really the turning point for me. And I decided, you know what, I'm passionate about this. I know a little bit about this. Turns out I knew nothing once I've actually got into it all. There is just so much to take into consideration when it comes to gut health. And it is quite complex. So bear with me. I hope you have a pen and paper. Write some notes down if you need to, and let's get into it, shall we? All right, so last week we went into what the digestive system is and how it works and what it makes, like what organs in the body make it up, and where it all goes wrong. And so we also talked about the microbiome, which, as you would well know, are our gut bugs. So we've got some good guys, we've got some bad guys, and then we've got some opportunistic guys. Now, to give you a little bit of an overview for those of you that missed it, our microbiome, being those good guys and bad guys, when they are healthy, our digestive system is healthy. And our digestive system has a lining to it, a mucosal lining. And the microbiome and this lining, they live in a symbiotic relationship. Okay. So when one is healthy, the other is healthy. And they really are our first line of defense to the outside world. It's to help us to absorb all of the things that we need to absorb to be healthy and to thrive in life, and also to keep out the bad things like pathogens and viruses and all of the herbicides and pesticides that might be on our food that we don't want wreaking havoc in our body. And so what happens is, over time, and if you want to learn more about the things that impact the microbiome, please go back and watch part 1. It is all in there. But things like overuse of medication, prolonged periods of stress, and we're going to go into this a lot more in a lot more depth tonight. So stress, antibiotic use, birth control pill, dietary choices. There's so many factors that can impact our microbiome. And I also talk about how we get our microbiome off of our mother. As we're born, that comes from mum. So that's all in part 1 as well. And so if mum's microbiome is compromised, we're inheriting an already compromised microbiome. We're having this lifetime of impact on our microbiome, and that then, once that microbiome the good guys start to get killed off, the bad guys or the opportunistic guys start to take over. And then that's what dysbiosis is. And what happens when dysbiosis is left to its devices is you end up with what's known as leaky gut. So just like that bucket there, that's what your gut lining can do. So it no longer provides that line of defense for those outside toxins and bad guys that we don't want getting into our body. It's just a free for all, and they get into your bloodstream, and then your immune system comes along and it attacks it. And then we end up with inflammation, we end up with food intolerances, and we end up with all kinds of illnesses and autoimmune conditions, and however it decides to manifest in the body. And that is obviously going to look very different for everybody. So that in a nutshell is what we talked about last week. So if that little snapshot there has just left you confused, please go back and watch part number 1, because it's really important to understand that. Okay, so tonight what we're going to do is dive a little bit deeper into the gut-brain connection. Now, I spoke about this last week, but I didn't go into it in much depth. So I really want to explore that tonight. And we're also going to be talking about parasites, worms. Yes, we all have them, and mold as well. So that can be an issue. So let's get into it, shall we? All right, so the gut-brain connection. You can see that little picture there. We've got the first brain being our brain and our gut being our second brain. So they used to think that the brain was in charge of the entire body, and it was in charge, is the head honcho. But what they now know is that the gut and the brain talk to one another. And there's a lot of people out there that believe that the gut is actually the first brain. So the communication between the two is bidirectional. So they talk to one another. It's not just a one-way street, in that the brain is telling the gut what to do, and the gut's just going from there. It's and I talked about this last week as well, that we've got the vagus nerve that connects the gut and the brain, and 90% of the nerves that are in the gut are sending signals to the brain. And so that bidirectional communication is made up of hormonal communication, and also neurotransmitters. Okay, so and that's coming from both the brain to the gut and the gut to the brain. And so with that in mind, increasingly there's clinical and preclinical evidence that implicates the microbiome as a possible key susceptibility factor for neurological disorders. So things like Alzheimer's disease, autism spectrum disorder, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, and stroke. And that's touching on a few. And I'd love to share a story with you. So for those of you that don't know, I host a podcast and I talk to people that have really incredible health journeys, that have utilized natural therapies or modalities to get them from their state of illness into a state of health and thriving. And one of the ladies that I interviewed was a couple of months ago now. She has multiple sclerosis and she had suffered an attack, and that left her paralyzed down the left-hand side of her body. So she was not able to walk. She was bedridden. She was still able to get around in a wheelchair, obviously, but she lost the ability to walk. And there was a few different things that kind of led her to have a bit of a mindset shift. And once that happened, she started implementing other things. And it wasn't just nutrition alone that got her there, but it played a massive part. And when I do my programs, I don't just come from a place of gut health either. I think that lays the foundation so that everything that is built on top of that is going to work better and more efficiently. And you'll understand what I mean when I get a little bit more into this. But it was very much the same for my friend Amanda. And once she started implementing all of these things, she began to walk again and her symptoms started to improve. And at the time that I was interviewing her lesions in her brain have not progressed, have not worsened at all in over 11 years. And she's no symptoms of the multiple sclerosis anymore. And so this communication between the gut and the brain is called the gut-brain axis. And the neurotransmitters that I was telling you about before. So an example of that is the fight or flight response. You no doubt heard about that. That's a really big one. And the other one is those hormonal communications. Now, I've done a presentation on this in the past where I talk about how it affects our endocrine system, our reproductive system. So if you'd like to have some information on that, please sing out. Things like that might be of interest to you in that department of things like PCOS, endometriosis, infertility. So please, if these are any kind of issues that you're going through, I can pass on that recording to you as well. All right, so they're producing, our gut microbes produce these chemicals and hormones, and they're sending signals to the brain. So these signals are controlling things like appetite. I talked about how the stats 95% of serotonin, so your happy hormone, is produced in your gut. So if your gut microbiome is out of balance, then you can understand how things like depression and anxiety with that hormone being out of whack are going to come into play. Things like binge eating and sugar craving. So what happens is there's certain foods that these pathogens and microbes in your gut feed off of, and they thrive on these things. And it's no different to being addicted to alcohol, or no different to being addicted to drugs. It is the same chemical response that is happening in the brain, in that these guys are going, feed me a Big Mac, feed me chocolate, feed me that chocolate cake. You know, these guys are in charge. And so if you are ever finding yourself in a situation where you feel like you have no control over your food choices, that is why. And I promise you, I have been there. I used to, well, I am now, but I used to be a real health nut prior to having my boys. I've always been very active, and I've always looked after and nurtured my body well, minus my party years where there was a fair bit of alcohol in there, but I think that's pretty standard. Long past those days now. And so after I had my boys, I had rounds of antibiotics. I had all of the drugs that were necessary for childbirth and post childbirth. And then running on no sleep, I was craving sugar for energy. And it was just a vicious cycle then. And it would be to the point where I'd be reaching for biscuits was a big thing for me, or muesli bars. And I don't ever normally have that stuff. But because I was constantly snacking, I felt like I needed that stuff, and I had it in the house. And so I would be reaching for my fourth or fifth biscuit for that day. And in my mind, I'm going, no, Tony, you don't need that. No, 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 no. All the way until that biscuit got to my mouth. And then I would beat myself up about it. And so, and I had conversations with my husband at the time, and I was just like, I need your help. I can't control this. And I was frantically Googling what the hell was going on with me, because I had no idea why I couldn't control this. I now know why. Now, if you're still skeptical about how your oh, that didn't sound good. There was a big bang. If you're still unsure about how your microbiome can impact these things, I want to share another story with you about another podcast interview that I've done. So there's a lady that's also high up in the gut health world. She's been doing this much longer than I have, and her son is on the spectrum. And so her son had no words. This was when he was about 3.5. And so she has gone overseas to get additional help and support, because she had digestive issues all of her own. And so what happened was they ended up getting a fecal transplant. And so for those of you that don't know what a fecal transplant is, it's where you take the microbiome of a healthy person and put it into somebody that has a compromised microbiome. And so this fecal transplant happened. There's a lot of controversy that surrounds this, by the way, but the clinical results seem to be amazing. And so her son, after only 2 days after having this transplant, had words. And so all of the words were up there. There was just this link, this connection missing, that something wasn't getting through so that he could get the words out. And that fecal transplant was enough to get that happening. And I want to mention on that note too, that when it comes to children with speech delays or that are on the spectrum, the sooner that you intervene from a gut health point of view, the better the progress that can be made. And the reason for that is because when they're little, their brains are still developing so much. And so between the ages of 0 and 7, that is an optimal time to be implementing these changes and can have the biggest impact for those children. Okay, so now I mentioned before about the flight or fight response. And this is so important. I cannot stress enough how important stress is. It isn't always necessarily a bad thing. It's actually designed to save our life. So from an evolutionary standpoint, it's designed for when, old caveman back in the day was being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. It's designed to take blood and put it to your brain so you can be energized and quick thinking and go, okay, what next? How do I get out of this? Do I stop and fight, or do I run away? And it also sends that to your extremities so that you've got that adrenaline and cortisol that you're able to defend yourself or run away as well. And so that's what this stress response is designed for. And the problem is that we tend to be stuck in that flight or fight response, whether or not we feel like we're stressed out of our brains. You don't necessarily need to be going, oh my God, I'm so stressed. But there are things like scrolling on your phone, that's keeping your brain in that flight or fight response. Watching TV, the way that you need to remove yourself from that fight or flight response is by doing things like getting out in nature and taking a walk, or reading a book, unless it's like a thriller, probably not the best idea. Meditation, journaling, all those kinds of things. That's why, it's not woo-woo, it's actually science. This is why everyone's always saying that these things are so important. Okay, so when working properly, that flight or fight response, as you can tell, is going to be beneficial. And so that cascade of hormones, stress hormones, are flooding the body. And when that's happening, what happens, as I mentioned, goes to things like your brain and your extremities that are going to be useful for you in that situation. But the things that aren't useful in that situation are things like your digestive system, your healing and repairing functions, your reproductive system. So that's another reason why a lot of health professionals talk about the importance of reducing your stress loads if you're having troubles conceiving, or even if you're looking to conceive. I cannot stress enough how important it is to improve your gut health prior to having children. And I have that same conversation in the recording that I mentioned about earlier, that I talked about our endocrine system and the hormones and everything responsible for our reproduction. All right. So the problem, as I was saying, is that stress seems to be everywhere for us. For myself as a mum, when I wake up in the morning, I'm immediately thinking, okay, what needs to be done? I've got to get breakfast ready for the kids. I've got to pack their lunches for daycare or kindy or whatever it may be. What jobs do I have to do? I've got a presentation to prepare for. For those of you that aren't mums, you might be in a stressful environment at work. You might have deadlines to meet. You might have a co-worker that you don't get along with. You might be arguing with your partner or your best friend. For us mums, we have the kids in our ear. Mom, I'm hungry. Mom, I want this. Mom, I want that. And, your brain is not your own. And the problem is that your brain cannot distinguish between life-threatening stresses and minor stresses like those things. So stress is stress to the brain, and it has that same cascade of hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, running through your body, regardless of whether you're about to have to shape up and defend yourself, run away, or whether it's just, Mom, wipe my butt. All right. So as you can imagine, that's just not sustainable. When it comes to altering your gut microbiome, all you need, the figures vary. I've read either between 10 to 20 minutes of a chronic situation to alter your gut microbiome. So you can imagine if we're stuck in this stress response 24/7, then that's going to impact your microbiome. So a good indicator as to whether or not you're stuck in this response is whether you're constantly thinking, planning, or doing. If you can't sit still and just be with your own thoughts and not be sitting there going, okay, I need to be doing something, then that is a really, really good indication that your body is addicted to those cortisol and adrenaline hormones pumping through your body. Okay, the other thing is that it has the potential to alter your DNA. So this is something, it's called epigenetics, and I love it. I had never heard about it until I started getting into this whole gut health scene. And one of my mentors, her name is Rhonda Muller. She's a nutritional therapist. I'm going to have her in the Doing It for the Kids Facebook group next week talking about this. Okay, so to give you a bit of a snapshot about how epigenetics work, is that they used to believe that genetics dictated your health, dictated your future. If mum passed away from breast cancer, there's a great chance that you're going to do the same thing. That's absolutely not the case. Well, yes, genetics load the gun. It is the environment that pulls the trigger. So you are in control of your genes are not your destiny. You are in control of your destiny. And there is a lot that you can do. These genes, these can be flicked on and off depending on The people that you surround yourself with, are they lifting you up? Are they motivating, or are they negative Nancy's and always bringing you down? Obviously, food is a critical component to that as well. And I don't think I need to elaborate on that. Stress. And when we're talking about stress, again, it can be the little things. Even moving to a higher altitude puts a stress on your body. All right. And these all impact our genetic profile. And as I mentioned before, your body can become addicted to these stress hormones, and your body can become stuck in that fight or flight. So it really is up to you to be proactive and putting steps in place to make sure that you're pulling yourself out of that. And I go right into that in my health coaching programs. And I also am going to go into that in part 3. So what impact can this prolonged stress have on your body? So I have touched on a lot of these. So we've got, you've got to think of your health from a cellular level. Okay. Our body operates based on cells. If our cells aren't functioning properly, then that's when our health goes south. So impeding normal cell regeneration and healing, disrupting healthy function of your endocrine system, including your thyroid, molecules needed to make other vital hormones is going to alter that, deteriorating your immune system. So 75% of your immune system resides in your gut. All right. 75% of your immune system. So if you're catching every bug that's going around out there, chances are things aren't looking too well in your microbiome. Difficulty with digestion, metabolism, and mental functioning. So for the metabolism component, you might be one of those unlucky people that doesn't matter what you eat, doesn't matter how clean your diet is, you just can't seem to shift the weight. And so that might be a reason why that's happening. And also, I talked about this in part 1, in that if your digestion isn't working and you do have a really healthy diet, but you're still sick and you're going, well, I eat healthy. Yes, that may be the case. But if your digestion system is already broken, then you're not absorbing the nutrients that you need, and your gut can actually produce their own vitamins, and things like your B vitamins, very essential. That's produced in the gut. And so if your gut isn't operating efficiently or optimally, then that can be depleted as well. All right, so some symptoms that this might be happening for you. We've got weight gain, aging a lot faster than what, a few more wrinkles than what you'd actually like or expect at your age. Low energy levels, weakened immune system, cognitive functioning, so brain, memory loss, mood swings, bone health, extreme fatigue, intense sugar and caffeine cravings, and chronic insomnia. So it might manifest like eating too much, or not enough, sleeping too much or sleeping too little. Withdrawing from others is another sign, and procrastinating, and neglecting responsibilities. And then nervous habits like nail biting or using alcohol and drugs to relax yourself. And then anxious or racing thoughts, that's another one. So all right, so this is leaky gut progression. So I've already touched on it a little bit, and I touched on this a lot. I went into a lot of depth with this in part 1. And so you can see over here, this is what your gut lining is meant to look like. It's meant to be nice and tight. And what happens is all of these things over time contribute to the breakdown of that lining, and you get what's known as leaky gut. And so you end up with those food intolerances and immune system issues. And so the viruses and bacteria and parasites and everything that are meant to reside in your microbiome, these guys, they all have a role to play. They're all there for a reason. But once that becomes depleted, then that's when, sorry, once the good guys start to be depleted, that's when the opportunistic guys start to take over and the bad guys start to take over. And so when that gut lining is broken down, they're no longer contained. They can escape into the bloodstream, as well as undigested foods, as well as the drugs that you're taking, as well as so these pathogens in your microbiome, when you're feeding them sugar and carbs, say, they are having this feast, and then they're releasing all of these toxins and chemicals and gases, and they're no longer contained. So this is how one way that bloating can manifest. And they're releasing all of these into your digestive system, and then that's escaping into your body. And then wherever they reside in the body after that, wherever they come to be, that's where they wreak havoc. And one of the places that can happen is actually the brain. And so, how this, in the same way that I talk about the gut lining, our brain has a lining as well, effectively, and it's called the blood-brain barrier. And just as the mucosal lining of the gut can become compromised, so can the blood-brain barrier. And once that's broken down, all of these things, all of these nasty things that our digestive system is there to protect us from, but can no longer protect us from, get in, and they cause all kinds of dramas in there. So that's when this can manifest as autism, ADHD, behavioral issues, speech delays, dementia, multiple sclerosis. Studies are actually finding, I've read a couple of studies on high levels of aluminium being found in the brain of children with autism, Alzheimer's patients, and also patients with MS as well. So that is, in a nutshell, how the gut brain axis and how what's happening in our gut is impacting our brain. So that's just a great overview of all of that. All right, so I don't want to go into mold too much, but it is important and it is worth mentioning. So some signs that mold might be an issue for you are things like brain fog, clarity of thought, static shocks on the skin, difficulty holding your urine. And you can test through this through a urine test. I would be going to a naturopath, having a look around the home. If your home smells musty and damp, has that kind of smell going on, or you might have had carpet at one stage that got wet, or a leaking roof or something like that. So if you've had health concerns arise and it's followed a mold infestation, I don't think I pronounced that right. Infestation. There we go. That's the one. And so, and that leads me on to parasites. So when we're talking about parasites and worms, as I was saying before, these guys all have a role to play. They're there for a reason. And yes, we all do have them. Some of you have 2 meter long worms in there. Sorry, I don't mean to gross you out. I know it's not nice. It freaks me out. Still freaks me out. And so again, that microbiome, when it's healthy, it can keep them intact. But once it's not, then they start to they have the ability to take over the body. And we're told that these things aren't a problem for us in developed countries, but that's not necessarily the case. When you think about it from a logical standpoint, all of our food, not all of our food is grown locally, or even in Australia. We've got a lot of imported produce. And not only that, but we're traveling more and other people are coming in and out. And so it's as easy as touching a door handle that someone who has an infestation, I said it right, And then, pick your nose or scratch your butt or whatever it is. Put your hands, haven't washed your hands and you're eating food. I love how pick your nose and scratch your butt are the first two things that came to mind. Eating your food, that's as simple as it can be to pick it up. And we all know how wonderful kids are at picking their nose and scratching their butt and doing all that really gross things. And you can get it off animals and all kinds of things. And, it wasn't that long ago. Well, actually, it kind of was. But I went over to Bali with a group of girlfriends and still reliving my younger days. And not a single one of us did not catch that Bali belly. All right. And so that might not necessarily cause you short-term discomfort, but what can happen is that they can go underground and they can wreak havoc further on down the track. And so these parasites and worms life cycle coincides with the moon cycle. And so, a great way to, or a great sign that you or your children might have this parasitic problem or worms is around the full moon. There might be disturbed sleep, there might be bedwetting, because that's when they're most active and that's when their reproductive cycle happens. And so they're moving into the intestines, and of a nighttime they're nocturnal as well. They're climbing out and the females lay their eggs around the anus. And so you can imagine how uncomfortable and irritable that would be. And then so when that's happening for children, and adults can have mood swings and anxiety as well. But, that disruption in sleep and all of the toxins and chemicals and everything else that they're releasing are going to cause those issues. Obviously, now that you're aware of the gut-brain connection, how that happens, but also because of that lack of sleep, that disruption in our sleep. So those behavioral issues that seem to come out of nowhere. I know my son, I've been able to pinpoint when I need to do the worming thing again, because he will be cruising along, his behavior will be incredible, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, he'll just start acting out, and you're just like, what have I fed you? It's just like, yeah. Anyway, so there are a few things to keep an eye out for. Heart racing, anxiety, I think I mentioned, bedwetting, I'm pretty sure I mentioned. Teeth grinding is another one. So if you've got like a really sore jaw, so you may not even be aware that you grind your teeth, but if you have a sore jaw, that could potentially be what is going on there. Of course, itchy bum, inappropriate sweating is another one, or not sweating at all. And the other thing to keep in mind when there's a parasite issue, generally that will mean that there is a heavy metal issue as well. Okay, so the two things go hand in hand. And I mentioned before about how they all have a role to play. And so that's what your parasites can be there for, to mop up the heavy metals. And so when you're doing a parasite cleanse, depending on how ill your health is, it might not be as simple as just going in and wiping them all out, because when you do that, for some people, you can have really bad die off, and you can, because they're releasing those heavy metals and whatever else back into the system, it can really be uncomfortable, and you can get nauseous and headaches and all kinds of things. And I talked about this in my previous webinar as well, part 1, and how important it is, if you're going to be detoxifying your body, that you actually need to heal and seal your gut first. And the reason for that is because if you do not heal or seal your gut, then that is just what you're trying to detox from is going to continue to cycle around your body, and you're going to overload all of your other organs that are responsible for detoxing as well. So please, if any of this has resonated with you and you haven't watched part 1, go back and watch part 1 so you can understand what I'm saying and learn a little bit more about it and know how to proceed. And I'll also be talking a lot more about the whole detoxification in part 3 as well. And I'll touch on that in a minute. And so to get rid of them, you need to starve them of the things that they are thriving on. So we do need to get the heavy metals out of there. We've got to stop feeding them sugar and carbs. They live on this stuff. They're the reason why you have the cravings, remember. So as long as you're continuing to put that into your body, they're just going to feed off of it, and that's what they reproduce on. That's what they thrive on. So you've got to cut out the breads, you've got to cut out the pastas, all of the things we love pretty much. Got to cut those things out. And I do want to make a disclaimer there that as much as I was in a place where I loved these things, I can promise you it only takes 3 to 4 days to alter your microbiome. So once you stop feeding them, for some people that can take a little bit longer for those cravings to stop. And just remember, I said that it is like a drug or alcohol addiction. So you can have those withdrawal symptoms, and you can still, it's only natural to want those things. But once you start feeding your body with the right foods, with the right fuels, the things that your cells thrive on, then I can promise you those cravings subside and you want the good stuff. All right. So it does work the other way as well. And the other thing that they feed off as well is the glucose that's produced when you are in that fight or flight mode. So this is another reason why it is so, so, so important to reduce your stress. And it's not as easy as saying reduce your stress. You go, okay, I'll do that. It's not. It's it's something that you need to work on, and it's something our brains, just like I mentioned before about how our children are developing, and that's a great time to intervene because their brains are very plastic. They're very malleable and you can shape, they're still forming all of those pathways. We are still able to do that even now, even down the track from now. It's just not going to happen as efficiently as what it would if we were 5 years old. But we still can retrain our brain. And the way that we do that is to start thinking positive thoughts, and even whether you believe it or not, just saying it to yourself constantly. And then that way we start to believe what we're saying and our thought processes change. I talk about this a bit in part 1 as well, in that our thoughts are sending chemical reactions in our body as well. So you want to be very mindful of what your thoughts are saying to your body. It really does make a difference. Okay, once you've got them under control, you don't need to be afraid of them. Was a little last note that I had on that slide. Okay, so the gateway to that, I've missed good in that. That good gut feeling part 3 is all about getting to the root cause of the problem. Like I mentioned before, if you're wanting to fix your gut, if you're wanting to fix your health concerns, your health issues, then healing and sealing your gut is the first port of call. And I've gone over that for you now. But I'm going to be going into more depth on the next webinar on how exactly you can do that. I'm going to be talking about healing foods. I'm going to be talking about detoxing. I'm going to be talking about how to calm the nervous system and how to reduce stress. And yeah, essentially arming you with all of the tools that you need to understand or to start putting steps in place to move forward to a healthier version of yourself. Now, I will just touch quickly on my gut health program as well that I will be releasing early next month. So we're currently mid-March. I'll be releasing, in case you're watching this as a recording, I'll be releasing it at the start of April. So if you're watching this recording and you're interested in any of what I'm about to tell you, please click the link in the underneath the video. I'll pop some links down there so that you can find me on Instagram. You can email me, whichever way suits you best to get in touch. But My gut health course, I take a very holistic approach to gut health. It's not just arming you with, okay, these are the foods that we want to remove. So it's called weeding and seeding. So we've got to take out the things, like I mentioned, the sugar and carbs, the things that are feeding the pathogens and keeping them in higher numbers than the good guys. And then also the healing foods. So the foods that we want to be introducing to help the good guys reproduce and get the upper hand again. But as well as also healing and sealing the gut in that process. So I go through all of that, but I also help to coach you through identifying the biggest stresses in your life and helping you to navigate them and put steps in place to improve them and move forward. The healing and sealing of the gut and improving your gut health really does, as I mentioned before, lay the foundation so that anything else that we're working on in that period is just going to be amplified. It's going to be magnified. You're going to have a calmer mind. You're not going to be the yelly mum anymore. You're going to have a lot more tolerance, and things that used to stress you out are not going to stress you out as much. The other part of the program that is going to be really beneficial for you is I've got a personal trainer on board. Her name is Mel. She's my sister-in-law and she's amazing. She's so much fun and a bucket full of energy. And she's going to provide us with daily workouts as well. And so the daily workouts, we all know the importance of exercise and how it improves your mood and all those kinds of things. But the other thing that it does is it completes, is the word I'm looking for. It completes the stress response. So just like the saber-toothed tiger analogy that I used at the start of this video, just like you would in that situation, the running and escaping from that animal completes that stress cycle response. So it helps to bring the body back into to get rid of those stress hormones and get them out of the body and dealt with the way that they need to be. So they're just a few of the things. You get educational videos every week. You get one-on-one coaching with myself. You get access to Mel's videos. You get access to 24/7 support in a personalized Facebook group. So you can ask all of your questions in there anytime. You don't have to wait for a chance to get on that one-on-one coaching with me. And we also have Rhonda Muller, my mentor and the nutritional therapist that I was telling you about before. Also have her on board to help answer any of those tougher kind of questions if you really struggling. And so it's a really great opportunity, and I will be talking more in depth about what that all involves in part 3 next week. All right, so here are all my details. You've got my email address there, my Instagram handle, and then you can find me on Facebook as well. So I've got That Gut Feeling AU, or I've also got a community of incredible women that are there to uplift and support. And I try and keep it nice and fun and light, but it's very informative all at the same time. I'd love for you to come along and join me in that. So search Doing It for the Kids. And you'll find me. It doesn't have community on the end. It's just Doing It for the Kids. And so, if you miss part 1, big part of why I'm doing what I'm doing is for the kids. How are we able to let our little ones reach their full potential if we are feeling shitty, if we are feeling run down, if we're feeling tired, if our body is failing us, and it's not our body failing us. It's like I mentioned, your digestive system. Once that's rectified, the rest, I promise you, will fall into place. And so that's me for tonight. If you have any questions, please pop them in the chat. I will address them now. Thank you for those of you that are watching this on replay. If that's you and you've found it informative, you've learned something out of this, please give me a thumbs up, give it a like, share it with a friend, share it with a loved one. This information is really important, and the more people that I can reach, the better. All right, guys, thanks for joining me. Have a great night.